Okay, so good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining in this lesson planning webinar. I think it would be fitting to get to know each other first. Probably you don't know me, so you can just call me Ace, but my full name states there. It's Crescente Garong. So I'm from the Philippines. I've been in the ELT industry for 20 years, and around 15 years of that, I spent mostly doing TEFL and TESOL training in the Philippines and also here in Vietnam. So I've been working and living in and out of Vietnam for the past, I think, almost 5 or 6 years. Yeah, except the pandemic when I came home. So we are a TEFL TESOL training provider and also IELTS, OAT, PTE exam preparation provider. So those who are planning to take, like the nurses who are taking the OAT test for their visa screen or for work abroad, yeah, that's what we do. We are recognized by OAT Australia. OAT is an English test or similar to IELTS, but specifically for medical professionals. And I handle the nurses field or industry. So we used to have let me just admit some. We used to have a training center in Cebu, but during pandemic, we closed it and just focused on online training nowadays. Also in the past, I used to travel around Visayas and Mindanao to do free training and yeah, free training. But due to pandemic and after pandemic, um, I think people are now more familiar with online training. So we mostly do online training nowadays. I think that's also less costly on my part. Why I'm offering free training? This is not something new to me. I've been doing this ever since. And I've been doing this because 20 years ago, when I started in this industry, I had a hard time looking for materials and training for us, teachers, or interested to become an ELT teacher. We needed to travel to Bangkok or Thailand, Singapore, just to attend training in ELT. So, and also because I did not start as an English teacher, I majored first in computer science. But eventually I fell in love with this industry, studied my teaching units, got my license, and went to study my master's in Cebu Normal University. However, I did not continue writing the book, just defended the title. So I completed my academic records, but did not finish the book because I chose to be in a greener pasture and worked abroad. And so I did not continue that. So that's all about me. So hopefully you can check our social media sites, our Facebook, our YouTube channel, our Instagram for updates and to get to know us of what we do and for future training also that we offer free training. We also have paid training, but yeah, free training we also offer regularly. So let's proceed. I'll make this as quick as possible so uh, we can spend our weekend wisely and productively. So this is our company, EIS Education International. Lesson planning. So I have a survey. I'd like to post this one and I want you to answer. can you please check the poll and give your answer? I'd like to know you a bit more with this survey. Okay, so wow, so most of you are currently teaching. Like 60%. We have one more. Okay, so I think that's my other account. It says one is not able to participate yet. Okay, very good. So 6 out of 9 are currently teaching, and most of you are well balanced, both online and on-site teaching. Some 30% are teaching online and 30% teaching on-site. And 5 or 50%, they prepare their own lesson and teaching materials. Why I ask this? Because there are companies that already have ready-made materials, and all we have to do is just deliver the lesson. Because if that happens, yeah, somehow your lesson planning is affected because it's already made. And 40% says that they're required to prepare and submit lesson plan. So meaning more than half are not required. So we'll see how is this going to impact you as a teacher. Okay, very good. Thank you for those who participated in the poll. And for those who just joined in, thank you very much. So yeah, we still have some people joining in. Let me just admit them. Let me proceed. So in our webinar today, these are our objectives, as I've mentioned in the ad. First, we're going to identify the basic parts of a lesson plan. Why is this important? Because whether you work in the Philippines or maybe if you're working in the Philippines, this may not matter so much because most ESL schools during interviews don't even ask these. But if you have plans of working abroad and, becoming an international teacher or living abroad as an ELT teacher, this is one of the basic information that they expect you to know. And during interviews, you will be asked questions that would lead to eliciting your knowledge about lesson planning. So at least you know the basic parts, the jargons, the names, and be familiar with it. Otherwise, when you are being interviewed, or maybe some interviewer will throw you questions with some jargons, and if you're not familiar, they would know right away that you did not probably prepare well and you did not study your teacher training. Also, we'll look at how to sequence activities to promote communication. In ELT, as I'm not sure if you are in the ELT industry, we always highlight communicative teaching. So how do we really say that our lesson is communicative enough? Then writing effective lesson aims would be our other objective. Okay, so some people are still joining in. So for those who just came in, please make sure that you rename your Zoom name to your full name so that we'll be able to check your attendance. Just to make sure that we know the people who are attending this webinar. Thank you. And this is a free webinar, okay? It's for everyone who are interested to learn more about ELT teaching and planning. Okay, so let's move on. Should we plan our lessons? And as the poll says, most of you are teaching, so I believe this is a no-brainer question. Definitely, yes, we have to plan our lessons. Although sometimes, I've mentioned earlier, there are schools who may not require you to plan because everything is already prepared, especially those who are teaching online. The lesson materials, the flow of whatever you're going to be teaching, it's already made for you. All you have to do is just deliver. However, even though that is the case, I still encourage you to prepare. When I say prepare your lesson plans, it's not just the materials that you're going to be using, but putting into writing the steps that you will be following. What are you going to do first? What are you going to do next? How are you going to execute the activities? How are you going to group students if it's a group class? How are you going to present the picture? How are you going to introduce the game? Because each classes that you will be handling are different. Maybe the same lesson, the same, let's say, unit 10, page 12, for example, or whatever unit that is, and subject that is you're teaching. The group of students that you will be introducing that will be different. Some may need some more elaborate instructions or a simplified one. So definitely, if you are just going to, use your memory in delivering those, might be a challenge for some students. I'm speaking based on experience because when I handle, for example, children, even though the same subject but different classes, there are classes that needed more examples more than the other. And if I will just have one size fits all, that kind of presentation of the lesson, so the other class who needed more support might suffer. So yes, we have to plan, whether required or not. I always encourage teachers to plan. May it be a simple planning or just writing down the steps on a piece of paper. It's a good practice, I think, to plan and to write whatever you're going to be teaching, because lesson plan is a document. It's a record. It's a working document. So it's something that you can use many times over the years, especially if you're teaching ELT. In ELT, unlike regular classes wherein we teach by term, for example, the whole year term or one whole year program divided into 2 or 3 terms. In ELT, courses, they run probably at least 3 months to 5 months, and then some courses may be repeated, or you have multiple same courses that are running in the same year. So you have something to refer. And also, as a teacher, we use that document to reflect. Are we teaching this the right way? And how can we make our teaching better next time? So yeah, it's important that we plan our lessons. I think that's already clear. I'd like to point that out, whether you are required or not. So Lesson planning jargons. We start with this one. We can never plan if we don't know what are the terms that we are going to encounter, especially if you work for international schools or if you work abroad as a teacher. These are the terms that you will encounter. For those who are teachers in the Philippines, so probably your teacher training or your education degree. Also, you have your own terms. I've studied education, but when I venture into ELT teaching, these terms were new to me. So I needed to do a lot of reading, research, and study in the past. So by the way, I've got my TESOL certificate. When was that? More than 10 years ago. And I've got my TEFL trainer certification also a couple of years ago. And these things are the ones that we study and we teach to our students, trainees who are planning to work as an ELT teacher abroad. Although again, in the Philippines, this might not too familiar because we don't use this in ESL, in our ESL schools in the Philippines. So I divided the terms into groups. So the first group, we call it, these are the pre-teaching, the general terms. You have here language skills. Oops, sorry. That's wrong. Okay, never mind. So language skills. When we are teaching ELT, we always have to ask ourselves, are we teaching skills or systems? When we say skills, are we teaching listening, reading, writing, speaking? Or are we teaching, when we say language systems, are we teaching vocabulary, grammar, function? Or it could be a mix of both. So we have to know that. So sometimes we are asked by our supervisor when we submit lesson plans or when we are evaluated and they check our lesson plan, they will ask you, what are you teaching? What's your focus? Skills or systems? And it depends on your program. If your program is English for academic purposes, so most likely the systems, grammar, vocab, or low-level classes, usually they teach systems, grammar, vocab, and integrate it with skills, listening, reading, writing, speaking. But right now, the common is an integrated lesson, meaning everything is there, listening, reading, writing, speaking, but still there is a focus. There is, because you need to present mastery at the end of the lesson. So you must identify what specific skill are you teaching. So skills or systems. Then we have teaching framework. When you are confronted with this term, teaching framework, it means what model are you following? In ELT, the common models that we often see are PPP and ESA. I'm not sure if you're familiar. PPP stands for present, practice, and produce, or presentation, practice, and production. You have ESA, engage, study, and activate. I will elaborate this later on. So these are the frameworks, the models that you are asked to follow. So different schools may have different framework. And they may have a different name of this, but which means when you are teaching, you don't just teach and put sequences of activities and follow your own steps. There are models that we have to follow because the model is the standard of that particular company. And context. When we say context, this means the theme of your lesson. A lot of lessons I have observed in the past, some teachers may say, my student is asking questions out of the topic. That's very common. Why is that happening? It's because the teacher failed to present the context, present the theme of the lesson. That's why students are confused. What is the parameter of the lesson that you are teaching? So it's important that we're able to present the context, a theme. So example, if you're teaching a very simple, rainy, windy, cloudy, sunny lesson, the context there is weather. Or if you are teaching past simple regular verbs like visited, walked, traveled, the context there probably is weekend activity or summer vacation, something that happened in the past that would elicit or generate past simple regular verbs. So context is the theme. Context is not grammar lesson. Context is not vocabulary lesson. Context is the theme, a real life scenario that you are going to use in presenting the lesson so that students will see how this lesson is applied in real life. So we don't present grammar, we don't present vocabulary only, but they are based on a certain real life situation. So that's context. So you have to identify what is the context of your lesson. Then you have your main objective. In ELT, at least one lesson should have one main objective. Because if you have more than one, it means you have so many things to achieve by the end of the lesson. At least, we recommend just one because for mastery, again, you should only ask your students to achieve one at the same time. So your main objective is your overall goal by the end of the lesson. What are the students going to achieve? That is applicable in real life. So always remember that main objective is something that students will use in real life. So if you're, again, going back to the example of the context, weekend activity, for example. Context is weekend activities. And your main objective is by the end of the lesson, the students will be better able to share and talk about their favorite weekend activity using past simple regular verbs. So that is your main objective. So by the end of the lesson, or if you're using the PPP model, the production part, or if you're using the ESA, the activate part, the last part of the model, the framework, it is there that the objective is being performed by the students, and you're going to see that part. So they are going to be sharing, talking about their weekend activities. So it's a real life activity, application. So you don't put in the main objective something that is answering grammar or vocabulary activity only, because that falls under secondary objectives. Whatever grammar practice, drills, pronunciation, answering worksheets, games, they all fall under secondary objectives. For example, practice the spelling of past regular verbs. That falls under secondary objectives. Drill the pronunciation of verbs in past simple regular. That is secondary objectives. So vocabulary and grammar, they fall under secondary objectives. Personal objectives, others call it personal aims. In ELT, if you have done training in ELT, this is very common because we want to highlight reflective teaching. I hope you have heard of reflective teaching, meaning when we prepare lesson plans, yes, the lesson plan that you prepared is for your students, for your class, but this part is for you, personal objective. What is it something that you want to enhance about your teaching? When I first taught kindergarten, because I do a lot of adult training, so when I was given kindergarten class, my personal objective then was very simple, to master singing and dancing children's songs, because I'm not into singing and dancing. You don't sing in front of adult students. So yeah, that was my objective, just to master the singing and dancing of some YouTube songs. Or when I taught high school students, I don't write much on the board, but when you deal with teenagers, depending on the class also, you need to write something on the board. So my personal objective then was organize my writings on the board. So that's my personal objective, something that I'd like to enhance about my teaching in delivering that lesson. And hopefully that personal objective will not be the same all the time, because it means that you were not able to achieve this. You were not able to develop. This somehow we see it as your weakness that you'd like to convert into strength later on. So personal objectives and anticipated problems and solutions, both on the part of the teacher and students. Meaning, in delivering the lesson, try to also put in your lesson plan, what would be your problems in delivering it? What would be your students' problem in doing the lesson? And what would be your solutions to these problems? At least if they occur, if they happen, you know what to do. Example, because your lesson is more focused on listening, all of a sudden there was a power interruption. But if you did not anticipate that, you did not, as a teacher's problem, like power interruption or technical problem, like the CD didn't work, or sorry, in the past we use CD. Now you have your save in the computer. Maybe the speaker didn't work. So what are you going to do? You cannot just say, okay, let's skip listening because it didn't work. That will not work. That will not do. So you have to have a solution for that. Maybe you read the transcript of the listening. So these are parts of your lesson plan. Again, we are talking about the overall requirements of your lesson plan. By the way, you may ask questions towards the end. I'll give you a chance to ask if you have. You can write or you may speak later on. Then the main parts, the pre-teaching terms and while and post-teaching terms. So the pre-teaching terms, you have your opening routine. What is this opening routine? Your checking of attendance, your greetings, of course, greetings, checking of attendance, and sometimes some teachers, they give some gifts to students. So you do this one in the pre-teaching terms, pre-teaching stage of the lesson. A very quick opening routine, maybe 2, at most 3 minutes. Warm up. Warm up is your very short, fun, engaging activity related to the lesson, but not necessarily teaching the lesson yet. This is a very common problem here is, for example, the teacher is teaching weather, sunny, windy, rainy. And then in the warm-up, the teacher will ask, how's the weather today? And that's not a good warm-up question, because you are already asking something that the students will be learning later on. So don't give them that burden of answering that kind of question, because it's not yet the right stage to ask that question. So maybe you give them a picture puzzle of the sun, the clouds, for example. They don't have to think about it. They just look at it and do the activity. Could be a game also. A game, usually game, puzzles, group activities. In warm up, we encourage you to do group activities, not individual activity. So there is engagement, students to students engagement, and context setting. So earlier we talked about context. Here, context setting is how are you going to introduce your context. So normally warm up and context setting are connected, so that you don't have to prepare much. So if your lesson is about weather and your warm up is about your warm up is like picture puzzle, a game to solve a puzzle the quickest possible way, then your context setting can be as simple as, okay, class, look at the puzzles that you have formed. What is your puzzle team A? What is your puzzle team B? And then they answer cloud, sun, etc. And then you say, what do you think is our lesson today? So they pick up from there. That's just a simple context setting. How you set your context, how you introduce your context, so that they will have an idea. Okay, so this is what we are going to be studying today. But if students cannot answer, then just volunteer the information. Just say, our lesson for today, but at least give them the chance to guess first, whether they know it or not. While teaching terms, a question, can we do singing as warm-up? If the singing, warm-up can sometimes be interchanged with, what's the other term? There's another activity that can be, I forgot the term, icebreaker. One good criteria of warm-up is there must be engagement among students. So now you ask yourself, the singing of a particular song, will it promote communication? Will it promote students to students interaction? Singing is fun, singing is good, but if it does not promote communication, I don't encourage singing. But if part of your preparation to sing is maybe students are going to first look at the lyrics or look at the picture, look at this and that, there is communication, then the result of that very quick, short communication would be singing of the song, then that can be. So it's how we present. Actually, it's not just a question of, is singing a warm-up? It's how we present, how we deliver. That's why it's part of the planning, how we execute the activity that makes it warm-up. Okay, I hope I answered your question. You can just call me Ace. Yeah, you can call me Ace. So that's what I wanted to say. Whatever activity that is, it can be a warm-up, but make sure that there are two things you have to do. Number one, it is related to the lesson. Number two, it promotes communication, students to students interaction. And if you have those two, then that can be. Otherwise, it may fall under icebreaker. And warm up, by the way, is always in the beginning of the lesson, beginning of the introduction of the lesson. Because other activities that fall under presentation stage that you just insert to break the monotony, the mood of the class, that falls under icebreaker. Okay, so I hope I answered that question. Procedures. In the lesson plan, some format of lesson plans, you have the word procedures. This means that what the teacher will do. So you state there, by the end of this presentation, I will show you a sample lesson plan in ELT. So this is what the teacher will do. So you list there the things that you will do. And in line with that are the tasks, what students will do. So example, teacher introduces the game charade. Teacher gives instructions, etc. Then students play charade. Procedures and tasks. I've mentioned earlier interaction. We refer interaction as the T means teacher, teacher to students. SS means the plural of students, teacher, students. When teacher is giving instructions, that is teacher to students interaction. When the interaction requires response from the students, then that is students to teacher interaction. So we just put there TS, ST, SS. SS means students to students interaction. So in your lesson plan, if you indicate SS, it means that activity requires students to students involvement. So among themselves, they're going to do the activity. So like solving a puzzle. So that is students to students activity. But first, because you give the instruction, in the first part, that would be TS, teacher to students. And then maybe there will be some clarification from students. So it becomes ST, students to teacher interaction. Then SS, students to students interaction. That is what we mean by interaction. And it has to be written in your lesson plan, especially if your lesson plan will be evaluated by your boss, your supervisor. At least they know what kind of interaction you want to achieve in this activity. Then you also have the term ICQ and CCQ. Are you familiar with these two terms? ICQ stands for instruction check question. Very common, this is a joke even in the Philippines. When you say, class, get 1/4 sheet of paper, then one student would raise his hand, ma'am, is it 1/4? And then another student said, ma'am, 1/4? Another one, ma'am, 1/4. They keep asking, is it 1/4? Because in that situation, the teacher failed to do ICQ, to check if students understood the instruction. So ICQ is simply asking back the question, asking back your instruction in a form of a question that is answerable by yes or no. So you say, your instruction would be, okay, let's play puzzle game. We have 3 groups. I have here 3 sets of picture puzzles. Then you ask, are we playing a game? Yes. What's the name? Picture puzzle. How many groups? 3. So that is ICQ, instruction check question. The other one is CCQ, concept check question. Concept check question is similar to ICQ, but here you are asking questions to check students' understanding of the concept. Example, your lesson is past simple regular verbs, weekend activities, the context. Then you taught the vocabs, visited, traveled, walked. And then in the concept check question, you wanted to know if they got the idea about past simple regular. Then you just say, are these words action words? Yes. Are these words happening now? No. Are these completed actions? Yes. So yeah, those are the idea about past simple, completed action, action words, or actions that happened in the past. They all end with ed. So when students answer your question with those with those, then if they say yes, then probably they already got the idea about CCQ or the idea about past simple. Not just simply asking, do you understand? Very common, teachers would say, is that all right, class? Am I clear? Do you understand? So these questions are vague and they are not there to promote understanding. So instead, ask questions. ICQ and CCQ. All throughout your lesson planning, these will come out repeatedly because every time you introduce vocab, you introduce grammar, you will do these ICQ and CCQ. So these are the while teaching terms. Another while teaching terms in the presentation stage, when you present your lesson, you have pre-teaching vocabulary, meaning you present vocabulary that will be, we call it blocking words, difficult words that may interfere in reading or in answering questions. So a lot of, I'm not sure if you have experienced it, but in the past, when I was still teaching in the Philippines, the way I learn pre-teaching vocabulary, I will just open the book or ask my students to open the book and read it quickly, and then identify difficult words. That's not the right way to do it. So the teacher must identify what are these difficult words, present it to the class. And when you pre-teach vocabulary, you have to cover 3 things. MPF. M stands for meaning. So you introduce, elicit the idea of the meaning of the word. MP, pronunciation, drill the pronunciation. And F, function. Function, the spelling, and what is that word? Is it a noun, an adjective, a verb? So that student will have that in mind in the pre-teaching. And how do you select vocabulary? Well and good if the book or your lesson has already pre-selected vocabulary, but if you are going to select your own vocabulary, how are you going to select it? Number 1, it should be something that students will encounter in answering the questions in the comprehension check activity. Or it could be part of the answers of the question. So, which means not all difficult words you have to unlock, because unlocking of difficult words, you should only have around less than 10. Ideal is 7, because these words will be repeated many times all throughout the lesson. And if there are too many, because you just wrote and selected all difficult words, then there is no mastery. The idea of pre-teaching is because these words will be used in answering the question and will be one of the answers in the question. So only that. So not all difficult words will be used. Skimming is reading very quickly to get the general idea of the text if you are doing listening or reading. Scanning is reading quickly also, but here students are going to answer questions. If it's scanning for information, so maybe the question, by the way, skimming and scanning, these are while reading and while listening activities, meaning you don't present listening and reading activities for the sake of just presenting and students are not doing anything, because you will ask them later on. No. While students are listening for the first time, or every time they listen and they read something, they must do some activity. So you have skimming and scanning. In the skimming, you can just probably ask 1 or 2 questions for them to answer while reading quickly. And in scanning, you ask them who, where, what, when questions. Or scanning for details, you ask them yes, no questions, true, false questions. So these are scanning activities. Then noticing or clarification. Noticing is a stage in the activity wherein you try to draw students' attention to that particular part of maybe reading material. Example, you're teaching past simple, regular verbs, and you're using a story, an article to introduce past simple. So you just say, okay, open your book to page 10. There is a short story there, and I want you to look for action words that end with ed and encircle them. So that's a simple way of noticing. That's one. Another one is maybe you write on the board a sentence or two with verbs in past simple, and then you tell them where is the action word here. Then maybe they will say traveled, visited, and then you say what is common between the two. They have ed at the end. Yes. Are they action words? Yes. So you're doing CCQ at the same time. That's noticing. You just want to highlight, to point out the grammar, the vocab you wanted them to notice. Clarification, on the other hand, is the presentation of grammar or vocab, the lesson, presentation. And there are three ways to present it. One is teacher explanation. This is very common. We present the lesson by the teacher explaining, discussing grammar, vocabulary to the class. That's number one. But that's not the most effective when it comes to ELT. The second one is most preferred, which is guided discovery. So the first one is teacher explanation. The second one is guided discovery. So what is guided discovery? So similar to noticing, you just present some examples on the board and then ask students questions or give them an activity for them to generate the idea of whatever you're teaching. If it's grammar, then probably ask them group action words that end with ed, action words that end with ing, for example, because you want to present past simple and continuous progressive tense. So from that activity, they will identify action words in the past. So that's guided discovery. The third one is self-directed. So self-directed, I think we've experienced this in our schools when our teachers ask us, go to the library or open your dictionary and look for these words, look for the meaning of these words, or research. So that is self-directed. Students are going to do it by themselves, which is something that we don't do in ESL that much because we promote communication. And among the three, guided discovery is more communicative because it involves interaction between the teacher, the students, or students to students among themselves. Okay, so noticing and clarification. Restricted, or others call it controlled practice. When we say restricted practice or controlled practice, this pertains to an activity. There is also what we call restricted or controlled input, by the way. When we say restricted or controlled input, these are listening and reading activities that are designed for classroom use, like the reading in the textbook, the recorded audio for beginners, elementary. We call that restricted or controlled because we made and developed the material for a certain group of students. And in the practice, the restricted and controlled practice, these are activities with single answer or answers are already identified. So for example, multiple choice test, that's restricted controlled. Or you ask your students to fill in the gaps or blanks. Or when you ask your students to answer yes, no, true, false questions, these are controlled or restricted activities. The goal of restricted control activities is mastery. For them to master and accuracy, for them to use certain grammar rules or certain vocabulary. The opposite of restricted is authentic or freer practice. So as I've mentioned also earlier, there is authentic and freer material or input materials. So these are maybe a real magazine, a newspaper. So these are materials that are used in everyday life, real materials the from the outside, okay? Not for classroom use, but for everyone's consumption or use, everyday life. Authentic, or a TV show or a podcast, not designed for classroom use. So that's authentic or freer material. When it comes to activity, authentic or freer practice or activity, this is materials or activities that will elicit answers coming from students. So meaning different students will have different answers. Example of authentic or freer practice. You ask your students, what is your favorite weekend activity? So different students will have different answers. So it's their own input, their own life activity or experience that they will share here. So in lesson planning, restricted falls under the presentation part of the model PPP, or in ESA in the study, because this is one of the comprehension activity, one of the activities in the comprehension check. Authentic falls under production or the activate, because this is the application of what students have learned in the lesson. So authentic and freer practice. So practice, I've mentioned this earlier, input, output, meaning the listening, reading, input. Output is writing or speaking. So your output, if your output is restricted, again, could be fill in the blanks. But if your output, writing output is authentic, maybe you ask them to write a letter to a friend describing your travel experience. So that is authentic output. And we're almost done with the parts of the jargon. So post-teaching terms, you have your closing routine. Closing routines could be your summary. When you wrap up, you summarize, you highlight what was the lesson about, because in ELT, we base our teaching on activities, from one activity to the other. And sometimes students only remember the games, not knowing what was behind the game. So in the wrap up, you summarize or you highlight. Example, a very simple question. What did we study today? Did we read today? Did we learn about the weather? Did we study sunny, rainy, cloudy? Then they say yes. So that's your part of your closing routine. And you have your reward. You give stickers or whatever points you want to give to your students that they're going to collect, or homework. That's part of your post-teaching terms. Yeah, so this is what I mentioned earlier. These are communicative framework that most books in ELT are using. So when we talk about PPP, presentation, it stands for presentation, practice, and production. Although they modify this one, most schools, structured schools or regular schools, probably even in the Philippines, we do PPP, meaning when the teacher comes to class, we'll begin with presentation, present the lesson, then give students some activity to practice. And most often, production is left out because no more time, or give homework. But in ELT, that we can't do something like that. We have to finish all the parts in one setting. But we modify this one. Some books, they refer it as WPPPW. So the first W is warm up. So you begin with an activity to engage students before you present the lesson. Then after that, you give students activity or activities to practice the lesson. Then let them use the lesson that they have learned into a real life application, so production. Then you wrap up, you summarize. So that's WPPPW. ESA by Jeremy Harmer. Jeremy Harmer got the idea from PPP, but he changed the name. He calls it ESA. So begin with an engaging activity. So this is the warm up in the WPPPW. And after the engaging activity, followed by study. Study is similar to presentation and practice. So in the study, the teacher is going to present the lesson, give students the opportunity to practice controlled activities. Then activate is similar to production. The freer activity, authentic activity. So this is where you see the freer activity and the authentic activity, production and activate. Controlled and restricted, you see them in study, in presentation, and practice. Okay, so whichever model you will be asked to do, at least you should know. Or when you apply for work and during interviews, you will be asked if you have prepared a lesson plan, at least you will be confident to say, well, in my lesson planning, I use ESA model, which means I begin my lesson plan with an engaging activity. Then I present the lesson in the study stage. I do this and that. And I make sure that students apply what they have learned, some or all, in the activate stage. So when you say like that, at least they will know that you are familiar with ELT teaching. Lesson aim. How do we write an effective lesson objective or lesson aim? I call it BOSS, BOSS. Others, well, in the past, I've learned when I was still studying my education degree, they call it SMART, SMART, right? But SMART is an acronym used in the business industry, not in the education industry. Others call it by different names, but personally, and throughout the years, I base my lesson objective here, BOSS. So your main objective is your boss. Meaning, when you prepare your lesson objectives, make it according to your syllabus. Base it on a syllabus that you are required to use or curriculum. Make your objective observable, meaning use words, action words that can be seen by you that students can perform in class. So example of that is by the end of the lesson, students will be better able to talk, share, perform, write. That is observable. What is not good phrase or good words when you use the word understand, learn, comprehend? These are not good words because they are not observable words. And it has to be specific. Example, when I say, talk about their weekend activity, favorite weekend activity. So it's not someone else's activity. And plus, when you say using past simple, so I think that's very specific. Past simple action words. And student-centered. It has to be about your students. When you talk about weather, talk about food, travel experiences, it has to be about them and not just someone else's story. So a lot of questions I've encountered. So what if the lesson is, let's say, There was a book I taught before, I think you're familiar, Jack and the Beanstalk. So it's reading. So how do you make it student-centered? How do you make it relatable to students by the end of the lesson? Students don't read Jack and the Beanstalk for the sake of reading Jack and the Beanstalk, right? You teach this reading material, well, number one, because of the reading skills you're trying to teach them, and the soft skills or the other skills, the skimming, scanning, etc. But behind that, what is the application of that in real life? So you have to identify what is Jack and the Beanstalk. It's a traditional story similar to what we have in the Philippines, mga kwentong bayan, kwentong bayan. So like Mariang Makiling. So instead of asking them role play, Jack and the Beanstalk, that's not a good output activity, not student-centered. Although they do the role play, students perform it, but that's not a real life application, right? Do you role play giant and what was it, the duck, the cow, the mom? No. So what is the real life application of that? So you think of, maybe because it's a traditional story, ask your students, come up with a poster about a traditional story in your country, in your city, in your town, that's popular or familiar to you. And then just make a simple drawing, a poster, make some few wordings, not really very expert drawing, and then they present it in class. Because in real life, that's what we do. We talk about traditional stories that are common, popular in our place, right? We talk about Mariang Makiling, we talk about uh, how chocolate hills were formed and made, so something like that. So it has to be a real life application that makes it student-centered. Or as simple as, if you're teaching weather, then ask your students to draw their favorite weather and the activities that they do. That's student-centered. And then they present it in class. Okay, so, oh, it's already time. So let me just present to you sample lesson plan. Oops. Hello, can you still see me? Wait.
Yes, yes, trainer.
Okay, thank you. Why is my, oh my God. Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. Hello? Okay, so yeah, sorry for the short technical interruption. So now here is a sample lesson plan. I'll provide you with this material if you need for your reference and to see it closely. So this is from English World. It's an ELT book from Macmillan. I think level 2, meaning beginner. Beginner level. So this is the first 2 pages of the book, the opening unit. You have the vocab here: swing, slide, roundabout, hands, and then a short article, dialogue. And in the dialogue, it's highlighted the use of can. So when you are going to make a lesson plan out of this, because in well, based on experience, if you are going to be writing your own lesson plan, normally schools would just say your coverage is page 32 to 33. So you prepare a lesson based on that given page. Then it will be like this. This is just one sample model. Some schools will have different format, but at least the terms here are similar. So you have your name, the observer, if this will be evaluated, the framework that you will be using, the context, the playground, you have your class level, elementary, you have your date and time, number of students, teaching aids, flashcards, worksheets, coloring pens, etc. This is for children, by the way, 7 to 8 years old. Your main objective, share to the class what students can do in the playground using the lesson vocabulary and can plus verb. Yeah, so I can jump, I can sing, or I can run based on the lesson. And then personal aim, create a fun and engaging vocabulary. So this is for you. So your aim is by the end of the lesson, you should be able to create a fun and engaging vocabulary activities. Secondary objectives, identify playground equipment, identify activities to do in the playground, practice the spelling and pronunciation of the vocabulary, make sentences using can plus verb. So if you notice, these are controlled, restricted activities, while the main objective, this is what the authentic or freer activity will come from. Then your anticipated problems or problem, you have, maybe students have difficulty identifying playground equipment. They're not familiar. So solution, use flashcards or picture cards. You have your stages here, you have your procedures and your tasks. So procedures, what teacher will do, tasks, what students will do, and you have your interaction and timing also. Oops, why? Do you see the next page? Why? It's not moving. Hello? Yeah, sorry, I think there's something wrong with the internet.
We cannot see the slide po.
Yes, yes, sorry. Let me present it again. Please bear with me. I'm almost done. It's at the end. My other computer is not connecting to the Wi-Fi. Wait. Okay. Okay, there, sorry. So as I was saying earlier, I think you're able to get the main objectives or objective, personal, secondary, anticipated problems and solution. And next to that is you already have your procedures and tasks. You have your lesson stages. So lesson stages will cover the model. So if you're using PPP model, so what will appear here? You have presentation, practice, production. But if you're using the ESA, so the words that you will use here will be engage, study, activate. The rest are the same. So just to point out some parts in how we write lesson plan. It might look scary in the beginning, but once you have mastered it, it will come easy because some of these are just done repeatedly. Okay. Example, teacher 3 seated in circles. So you'll have to apply also classroom management in your lesson plan. It should show. Teacher shows match the picture PowerPoint game to students. Teacher gives instructions on how to play the game. So because you give instruction, so you do ICQ. Teacher does ICQ to check students' understanding of the instructions. Then teacher recognizes the team that got the most points. This is after playing. So what students will do? Students in groups are seated in circles. Students play match the picture game. Students find two similar items to match and get a point. Students answer yes if they got the instructions right. This is during ICQ. And then students answer no if they did not get the instructions. So yeah, you match the ICQ and then the responses of the students. So that's how it's done. And ICQ is repeated all throughout. Whenever there is an activity. CCQ here, because in the lesson you presented in the vocabulary part, the pre-teaching vocabulary, you presented words. So to make sure that they got the words. So teacher presents the pictures and vocabulary again. Teacher does listen and repeat to practice pronunciation. Teacher does CCQ, concept check questions, to check students' understanding of the meaning and form of the vocabulary. We'd say form again. If it's vocab, the spelling in the function, is it a noun, a verb? But if it's grammar, the form is it past simple? Is it progressive? Something like that. Then you have your noticing, your clarification. So you might ask, noticing, does it come before or after clarification? Every time that you want to point out something, we call it noticing. If you want to highlight, look at the text, read this and identify. So that's noticing. But if you want to present, so after noticing, then you may clarify, you may present the grammar, the vocab, then you do clarification. So this might appear twice. It's not limited to once, but I'm just presenting it this way for easier reference. And this is a 50-minute class, by the way. And then you have your practice activity, controlled or restricted. So again, the ICQ comes up here because you are giving instruction on how to do a game or to do the activity. So if you notice, the activities are based on games. So these are just examples. So sticky ball game, they answer by throwing sticky balls on the board. And then your production stage, or the authentic and freer output. So by the way, so groupings are changed regularly. So they will not stick to one group. The arrangement, seating arrangement. So here the output is students will draw their own playground with equipment and the things they can do. Then you again do ICQ because you gave instructions. Then they present their drawing to their seatmates. Teacher walks around to check students' drawing and sharing. So make sure that when students are when they are drawing, you also go around and make sure that they use vocabulary and sentence construction. So you ask them, what's this? It's a swing, something like that. So they practice while doing because drawing and writing, it's a low energy activity, it's a silent activity. So to promote communication interaction, you put them in groups and then you go to their groups and talk about that. And then you wrap up and close it. Yeah, so that is how we, if you notice, that's how we arrange our activities in the lesson plan to make it communicative and to make it engaging, to promote communication, to make it fun. So students don't just learn words, memorize them, but the most important is to apply them. I can give you a sample lesson plan and the material that I use here for you to have a closer look and study them yourself. So in closing, what did we learn today? Did we identify the basic parts of a lesson plan? So yes, I think so. Did we familiarize ourselves with lesson planning jargons? Yes, we talked about that. The sequencing of activities to promote communication. Yes, I'd like to point out in sequencing of activities, make sure that, yes, we base our lessons on activities from one to another. But how do we make it communicative? Your activity must be in groups. If you are doing it group lesson, if you're teaching in groups. If it's one-to-one or online teaching, that's a challenge. So make sure that there is interaction in that activity, not just students doing it on their own. Example, seat work, it does not promote communication. Or when you ask your students to read an article online when you are listening, that's not promoting communication. So what I do if I teach online on one-on-one, I I I ask questions along the way, and then I relate it to his or her own real life experience. So example, we're reading about planets. Then and then there are different planets, it's the galaxy or whatever. Uh, the solar system, for example, that's where we live. Where do people live? Then what can you find in Earth that's not in other planets? So we say that we have water, we have air. So whatever the knowledge of the student. So just to promote communication. Then, yeah, how to write an effective lesson aims. We talked about it. Make your lesson aims based on the syllabus or curriculum. Don't teach something that is not required. Make it observable, specific, and student-centered. Okay. Is there anything else?